Welcome to our deep dive today. It's all about neuroscience, and we're using Leone Merton's Edwing's book as our guide.
Neuroscience for anxious.txt.
Yeah, that's the one. So today we're going to be looking at how our understanding of the brain has changed over time, from ancient theories all the way to the modern discoveries we have now.
It's fascinating. We used to think that the heart was the center of everything, thought, emotion, personality.
Yeah, like we were totally wrong.
And to think how far we've come to realizing that the brain is really the control center for pretty much everything we do.
Right.
And that journey started like thousands of years ago.
Okay, so let's go back in time.
Yeah.
What were some of the early theories about the brain?
Well, in ancient Greece, there were some pretty different ideas, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There was a guy named Alcmaeon of Croton.
Okay.
Around the 5th century BC, he suggested that the brain was really where our senses and thoughts came from.
Huh.
Which is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Especially considering how little they knew back then.
Right.
But then Aristotle came along a few centuries later.
Oh.
And he was all about the heart.
Okay.
He thought the heart was the center of it all. And because he was such a big influence, that heart-centric view kind of dominated Western thought for a really long time.
So even back then, there was like debate and disagreement about the brain.
Oh, yeah, totally. Always.
It's interesting how some of those early ideas were kind of on the right track.
Yeah.
Even without, fancy tools or technology.
Exactly. And it wasn't really until we get to this Roman physician, Galen, in the 2nd century AD,
Okay.
that the brain-centric view really starts to become more accepted.
Interesting.
Galen did all these detailed dissections and observations on animal brains, and he was able to trace the nerves
Wow.
connecting the brain to the body.
That's pretty impressive back then.
Oh, yeah. It was a big deal.
So that kind of solidified the brain's crucial role.
Exactly.
But wait, I thought his theories about animal spirits weren't really accurate.
Ah, you're right. His idea about animal spirits flowing through the ventricles of the brain. That was not quite right.
It sounds kind of funny now.
It does.
But, for the time, they were innovative.
Oh, yeah, totally. They were
Right.
way ahead of their time, but they just missed the mark.
Yeah, but what's really crazy?
What's that?
Even though Galen's model wasn't perfect, it was still believed for over 1,300 years.
You're kidding me? That's wild.
I know, it's just crazy.
It really shows how much of an impact his work had.
Right, his observations and theories were super influential.
Exactly.
Wow, okay, so over 1,000 years, though.
Yeah.
It really puts into perspective how long it takes for science to kind of evolve and for us to figure things out.
Totally.
So it seems like it wasn't until the Renaissance that we see people questioning Galen's theories
Right.
and really trying to find new answers.
Exactly. During the Renaissance, you have all these brilliant minds emerging, like Andreas Vesalius.
Okay.
He was doing these super detailed anatomical drawings based on actual human dissections,
Wow.
which directly challenged what Galen had proposed.
So he was like, hold on, Galen, I don't think you got it quite right.
Exactly. And then you have René Descartes.
Oh, yeah.
He's the one who really pushed the idea of the mind and body being separate,
Interesting.
which really set the stage for studying the brain as its own physical thing.
I see. So the Renaissance was like a turning point,
It was a huge turning point.
not just in art and culture, but in how people approached science in general.
Totally. It was like a reawakening.
Right. It seems like that new way of thinking really helped with making groundbreaking discoveries about the brain.
Absolutely. That questioning spirit and that renewed focus on observing and experimenting were so important for pushing knowledge forward.
And then on top of that, we have the invention of the microscope in the 17th century.
Oh, yeah. The microscope is a total game changer.
Right. It opened up a whole new world.
Literally.
So how did the microscope change the way we study the brain?
Well, for the first time, scientists could finally see the tiny structures inside the brain and the nervous system. Early microscopists, like Jan Swammerdam, they started to observe individual cells,
I see.
which, paved the way for a much more detailed understanding of how the brain was built.
Okay. But it took a few centuries, right?
Yeah, for microscopy to really, revolutionize neuroscience.
So we're talking about the 19th century now, right?
Yeah.
Were there any specific discoveries or maybe even individuals who were driving this revolution?
Oh, absolutely. One of the biggest moments was the development of Golgi staining.
Golgi staining.
Yeah. In the late 1800s by this guy, Camillo Golgi.
Okay.
This technique allowed scientists to finally see individual neurons.
Wow.
For the very first time.
That's huge.
Yeah. They were stained against a background of other cells, so it was like suddenly being able to pick out all the individual trees in a dense forest.
It's like they had a way to highlight the important stuff.
Right.
That must have been a game changer.
It was. And then there was this Spanish neuroscientist named Santiago Ramon y Cajal.
Okay.
He took this Golgi staining technique and just ran with it. He was so meticulous, and he mapped out all those intricate connections between neurons.
Wow. So we can thank him for showing us this communication network in the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And their work actually earned them a Nobel Prize in 1906.
Well deserved.
It established what's called the neuron doctrine.
Okay, what is that?
It's this idea that the nervous system is actually made up of individual cells, these neurons,
Okay.
and they talk to each other.
So their work completely changed how we see the brain, right?
It was a major shift in our understanding.
Did this help us understand that different parts of the brain are responsible for different things?
You're exactly right. In the 19th century, there was this parallel development, the idea of localization of function.
Localization of function.
Yes. So researchers like John Martin Harlow and Paul Broca,
Okay.
they were making some really groundbreaking observations, but they were using clinical cases.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Show me more.
Okay, so Harlow, he had this famous case study of Phineas Gage.
Phineas Gage, the railroad worker, right?
Yeah. The one who had that horrible accident where the metal rod went right through his skull.
Oh my gosh, yes. It's kind of scary to think about, but also incredible that he survived.
Right.
So what happened?
Well, Gage's personality and his behavior changed drastically after that injury.
Because it damaged his frontal lobe, right?
Exactly. And it was like a real-life demonstration of how specific areas of the brain control specific functions.
It's almost like a real-life experiment, but obviously a very tragic one.
Yeah, it's a powerful example of how physical damage to the brain can completely change who we are.
It's a bit frightening, but also amazing.
And then there's Paul Broca. He was studying patients who had problems with language.
Okay.
And he found this specific spot in the left frontal lobe, which we now call Broca's area.
Okay.
It's essential for being able to produce language.
So basically, different parts of the brain do different things.
Exactly.
It's like scientists were figuring out the brain's map,
It was like solving a puzzle.
but a really complicated one.
Oh, yeah. Definitely the most complex puzzle ever.
So this is incredible. We've gone from thinking the brain was just like filler in our heads
Right.
to realizing it's this incredibly complex network.
Yeah. A network that makes us who we are.
This is just the beginning of our deep dive, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We've just started to explore the world of neuroscience.
I can't wait to hear more.
There's so much more to learn about how all this knowledge is being used today.
Yeah, like make lives better and create a brighter future.
Exactly.
Okay, well, for now, let's pause and let our listener take all this in.
Yeah, it's a lot to process. This incredible journey through the history of neuroscience.
It really makes you appreciate how far we've come
Big
and
thanks.
how much we still have to learn.
Absolutely. Wonder what stands out to you the most so far? What are you curious about when it comes to the brain? So it's amazing to think about how far we've come in understanding the brain, right? And as we move into the 20th and 21st centuries, neuroscience just explodes into all these different areas of study.
Right. It's like a whole world of different branches within this one field.
Exactly. Each one kind of delving into a different aspect of this really complex organ.
Okay, so how do we even begin to understand this landscape?
Well, one way to think about it is like exploring a city. You know,
Yeah.
you have all these different neighborhoods, each one with its own character, its own function,
Right.
but they're all connected.
Yeah, and they all contribute to the city as a whole.
Exactly. So what are some of the key neighborhoods in the world of neuroscience? Let's start with behavioral neuroscience.
Oh, yeah. Behavioral neuroscience.
This one focuses on the biological basis of behavior.
So like all of our actions.
Yeah. Think about everything you do, reaching for your coffee, making decisions, interacting with people.
Okay.
Behavioral neuroscience looks at how your brain is actually driving all of those actions.
So it's like trying to figure out which parts of the brain are responsible for our actions and reactions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And how they all work together.
And researchers in this field, they're trying to map out those neural pathways.
They use all sorts of techniques.
Mhm.
They observe animals. They study brain activity in humans. And they're really trying to understand how different parts of the brain control different behaviors.
It makes you wonder if we could actually influence those behaviors.
It's a big question that neuroscientists are working on right now.
Could we change them?
It's definitely a complex ethical discussion, but the potential is there, you know, for developing new therapies.
Right, for maybe treating behavioral disorders.
Exactly. It's pretty exciting stuff.
It is exciting, but it's also kind of scary.
Yeah, I know what you mean. There are definitely a lot of possibilities to consider.
Okay, well, let's move on to another neighborhood then.
Okay, sure.
What about the study of the brain at its most basic level?
Ah, you're talking about cellular neuroscience.
Cellular neuroscience.
Yeah, this one zooms right in on the
Yeah.
building blocks of the brain, the neurons.
It's like using a super powerful microscope.
Exactly, to study all the details of these tiny but powerful cells.
It's crazy to think that something so small can have such a huge impact on who we are.
It is mind-boggling. And cellular neuroscience is all about understanding how these neurons work.
Right, and how they communicate with each other to form these complex circuits.
And this level of analysis, it's essential for understanding how the brain develops, how it functions, and what goes wrong when there's disease.
And that brings us to another important branch, right? Clinical neuroscience.
Yes. This one focuses on understanding and treating neurological disorders.
So things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's.
Exactly. And many others.
It's a field where scientific discoveries can actually make a real difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. Clinical neuroscience takes all the knowledge from the other branches and uses it to help diagnose, treat, and hopefully one day even cure these diseases.
It's pretty inspiring work.
It is. And we can't forget about cognitive neuroscience.
Okay, what's that one about?
This is the branch that looks at the higher level brain functions.
Okay.
You know, the ones that make us uniquely human.
So thinking, learning, memory?
Yeah, all of that. Language, decision-making.
This is the stuff that really makes us who we are.
Right. And cognitive neuroscience tries to figure out how all these processes happen in the brain.
So how do they do that?
Well, they use lots of different tools. Brain imaging, behavioral studies, computer modeling.
To really see how all these different regions of the brain work together.
Exactly. For example, they might use something called fMRI to see which areas of the brain are active when you're trying to solve a math problem.
Wow. Or when you're remembering something.
Right?
It's like trying to crack the code of consciousness.
In a way, yeah. And cognitive neuroscience, it actually draws from other fields too.
Like what?
Psychology, linguistics, computer science.
It's really interdisciplinary.
It is. It's all about understanding these really complex mental processes.
And speaking of interdisciplinary, you mentioned cultural neuroscience before.
Oh, yes. That's a fascinating one.
What's that all about?
Cultural neuroscience looks at how our brains and cultures interact,
Okay.
how they shape each other.
So are you saying that our culture can actually change the way our brains work?
Yeah. It's pretty amazing, right?
It is. I never thought about it like that.
Well, this field is still pretty new, but the research is showing that our cultural experiences can influence a lot of things.
Like what?
How we see the world, how we regulate our emotions, even how we interact with other people.
So it's not just nature versus nurture, it's both.
Exactly. Our brains are shaped by both our genes and our experiences.
Okay, before we move on, I have to ask about neuroinformatics.
Ah, yes. Neuroinformatics.
This is the data science of neuroscience, right?
You got it. You see, brain research generates a ton of data.
I bet.
Brain imaging scans genetic data, behavioral observations. It's massive.
What's neuroinformatics helps make sense of all that.
Exactly. It uses computer science and statistics and math to analyze and organize all that information.
So it's like creating tools to manage the complexity of brain research.
Right. And to extract meaningful insights from the data.
It sounds crucial, especially as we continue to gather more and more information about the brain.
It is. And as technology gets better, neuroinformatics is becoming even more sophisticated.
Wow, that's exciting. So we've talked about all these different branches of neuroscience, but it seems like there's this common thread running through a lot of them.
What's that?
Neuroplasticity.
Ah, yes. Neuroplasticity.
This is the brain's ability to change and adapt.
Right. It's one of the most remarkable things about the brain.
For so long, we thought the adult brain was fixed.
I know, but now we know that's not true at all.
Our brains are constantly changing in response to our experiences.
Exactly. We learn new things, we form new connections, we can even rewire our brains after injury.
That's incredible. It means we're not stuck with the brain we're born with.
Right. We have the power to shape our own brains.
So how does this rewiring actually happen? What's going on in there?
Well, think of your brain as a huge network.
Okay.
Billions of neurons all connected by these tiny junctions called synapses.
Synapses.
Yes. And when we learn something new or have a new experience, these connections between neurons, they get stronger or weaker
So our brains are constantly creating new pathways.
and modifying existing ones. It's how we learn. That's how we form memories.
And the more we use those pathways, the stronger they become.
Exactly. It's the basis of learning and habit formation.
So our experiences are literally shaping our brains.
They are. That's why it's so important to create positive and supportive environments for ourselves.
Because negative experiences can also have an impact, right?
Unfortunately, yes. Things like stress or trauma,
It can really affect the brain.
it can. It can weaken connections or even lead to new pathways forming that are associated with negative emotions.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
In a way it is, but understanding neuroplasticity gives us a sense of responsibility, you know?
For our own brains.
Right. For the choices we make, the experiences we seek out.
It's empowering to know that we have some control over how our brains develop.
It really is. Okay, are you ready to shift gears a bit?
I think so. What's next?
I think it's time we talk about how all this knowledge of neuroscience is being applied in the real world.
I'm ready. It seems like neuroscience is everywhere these days.
It is. It's not just in the lab anymore.
It's in classrooms, in boardrooms, even in our conversations about social issues.
You're exactly right. And one of the most exciting areas of application is in education.
Okay, let's talk about that. How is neuroscience changing the way we teach and learn?
Well, first of all, understanding neuroplasticity has been huge for education.
Okay.
We now know that the brain learns best when it's engaged, when it's curious, when it's emotionally connected to the material.
So the old school method of just listening to a lecture might not be the best way to learn?
Well, lectures can still be valuable,
Okay.
but neuroscience suggests that we need more active learning strategies.
Like what?
Things like hands-on activities, group projects, real-world applications,
Okay.
opportunities for students to actually teach each other.
So we're moving away from the idea that students are just empty vessels waiting to be filled with information.
Exactly. We need to create learning experiences that tap into the brain's natural wiring for learning.
It makes sense. And neuroscience is giving us the evidence to support this shift, right?
It is. For example, we now know that spacing out learning over time is better than cramming,
Oh, that's good to know.
and getting enough sleep is crucial for memory.
This is starting to sound like a cheat sheet for how to learn better.
It's like a roadmap guided by science.
I like it. So it's not just about academic performance.
Right.
Neuroscience is also helping us understand social emotional learning.
Exactly. We now know that emotional well-being is super important for cognitive function.
So students who are stressed or anxious, they're not going to learn as effectively.
Exactly. But students who feel safe and supported, they're more likely to thrive.
So it's not just about teaching facts and figures.
No, it's about creating a learning environment where students feel emotionally connected.
Right. And neuroscience can help us do that more effectively.
It can. For example, research has shown that mindfulness practices can really help students regulate their emotions.
Mindfulness.
Yeah, it can help them reduce stress and improve focus.
So it's all about nurturing the whole child.
I love that, nurturing the whole child, both intellectually and emotionally.
That's a really powerful idea. So we've seen how neuroscience is transforming education.
Yeah.
But it's also having a big impact on leadership.
That's right. It might seem like a strange connection at first,
It does a little bit.
but think about the skills that make a good leader. Decision-making, communication, motivation, building trust.
Oh,
All of these things, they're deeply rooted in how our brains work.
I see the connection now.
So how is neuroscience being used in leadership development? Well, for one thing, it's helping us understand how our brains make decisions.
Okay.
We now know that our brains are wired to focus on threats and avoid risks.
Which can sometimes lead us to make bad decisions, right?
Yeah, especially in stressful situations. But by understanding this, biased leaders can learn to overcome it.
So they can make better choices.
Exactly. And another key area is emotional intelligence.
Emotional intelligence.
Yeah. Neuroscience is showing us how important it is for leaders to be aware of their own emotions.
And the emotions of others.
Right. It's all about building trust, fostering collaboration, and creating a positive work environment.
So emotional intelligence is really important for effective leadership.
It is. And neuroscience is helping us understand why.
So it's like neuroscience is giving us the tools to become better leaders.
It's like a new lens for understanding human behavior.
What other insights has neuroscience brought to leadership?
Well, it's also changing how we think about organizational culture and team dynamics.
Okay, how so?
By understanding how our brains are wired for social connection,
Mm-hmm.
we can create work environments that are more supportive and productive.
So it's like using neuroscience to hack the system.
Yeah, you could say that. We're using this knowledge to design organizations that are more in tune with how our brains naturally work.
That's really cool. So it's all about creating opportunities for social interaction.
Yes, fostering a sense of belonging.
And promoting psychological safety.
Exactly. It's about creating a workplace where people feel comfortable taking risks and sharing ideas.
This is amazing. It seems like neuroscience is having a huge impact on how we think about leadership.
It is, both at an individual level and at an organizational level.
It's like we're rewriting the rules of leadership.
It's a really exciting time to be exploring this intersection of neuroscience and leadership.
I can't wait to see what the future holds. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground in this segment.
We have.
From the different branches of neuroscience.
Yes.
To the power of neuroplasticity.
And its impact on education and leadership.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It has. What stands out to you the most from all of this?
It's hard to choose, but I think the idea of neuroplasticity is really powerful.
It is.
It gives us a sense of hope and possibility.
And responsibility, too.
Right. We have the power to shape our own brains and create a better future for ourselves and for the world. You know, it's really amazing to see how much our understanding of the brain has come along, especially as we've been going through this book.
It really highlights the power of the scientific process.
Right. Totally, like how knowledge keeps building on itself over time. It makes me wonder what people in the future will think about what we know now.
Yeah, well, they look back on our theories and be like, wow, they had it all wrong.
Right. Or maybe they'll find it quaint.
Maybe. But that's what's so great about science. You know, it's always evolving.
It's not about being right or wrong. It's about getting closer to the truth.
Yeah, even if that truth keeps changing.
Exactly. It's like this ongoing conversation.
Refining our understanding as we go.
And that's what makes neuroscience so exciting.
It really is. It challenges us to rethink what we think we know about ourselves.
So let's talk about some of those big aha moments in neuroscience.
Yeah.
What are some of the discoveries that really blew our minds and kind of paved the way for where we are today?
We already talked about the neuron doctrine, which really changed how we understand the nervous system.
Right. It's not just a big blob. It's a network of individual cells.
Exactly. But another major turning point was the discovery of neuroplasticity.
Ah, yes. Neuroplasticity. The idea that our brains can change and adapt throughout our lives.
It really shifted our understanding of the brain.
Because for so long, we thought the adult brain was basically fixed.
I know, like a computer hardwired, and that's it.
Right. But neuroplasticity showed us that our brains are dynamic.
They're constantly responding to our experiences.
Both good and bad experience.
And that has huge implications for how we approach things like learning, development, aging.
Even recovery from injuries.
Yeah, powerful.
It gives us a sense of agency, like we have some control over our own brains.
We're not just stuck with the brain we're born with.
Right, we can learn new things, we can create new habit, we can even rewire our brains.
This is a very hopeful message.
Okay, so besides neuroplasticity, what are some other big milestones in neuroscience?
Well, advances in brain imaging technology have been really transformative.
Brain imaging.
Yeah. Techniques like fMRI have allowed us to see brain activity in real time.
Wow, so we can actually see which parts of the brain light up when someone's thinking or feeling something.
Exactly. It's like having a window into the working mind.
That's incredible. And it's not just fMRI, there are other techniques too, right?
Right. Things like EEG and MEG, they all provide different perspectives on how the brain works.
So with each new technology, we get a clearer picture of the brain.
And as we learn more, we're not only understanding ourselves better,
but we're also finding new ways to treat diseases.
To enhance learning, to improve our social interactions.
Speaking of social interactions, that's one area where neuroscience research is really making an impact.
It's a fascinating area how neuroscience is informing our understanding of social issues.
So are you saying that we can actually see what's happening in the brain when someone is experiencing prejudice or feeling empathy?
Well, neuroimaging studies have shown that specific brain regions are involved in those experiences.
That's fascinating. So this research could help us address issues like inequality and discrimination.
That's the hope. By understanding the brain processes involved in social behavior,
we can maybe find ways to promote tolerance and understanding.
That's the goal.
It's inspiring to think about how neuroscience can help us create a better world.
It's not just about studying the brain. It's about using that knowledge to improve lives.
Oh, this has been an incredible journey.
It have.
We've explored the history of neuroscience.
The different branches of neuroscience.
The amazing power of neuroplasticity.
And its impact on so many different aspects of our lives.
From education to leadership to social change.
It's been a privilege to share this exploration with you.
And we hope you've learned something new about this incredible organ we call the brain.
And remember, this is just the beginning. There's so much more to discover.
So keep exploring, Keep questioning and keep those neurons firing.
Because the more we understand about the brain, the more we understand about ourselves and our potential to create a better future.
And on that note, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll be back next time with another fascinating exploration of the human mind.